Good morning.
Good morning.
My topic is about Peter Horry. Does anybody know anything about Peter Horry?
Horry.
I personally don't know who Peter Horry is. Probably a lot of you who are from outside this area don't know who Peter Horry is either. Most of you know who Peter Horry is, however. Not Horry, which I was quick to be corrected on whenever I was down at Hampton Plantation meeting one of his, no, that was at Hopsawee, meeting one of his kin. Of course, she wasn't a direct, she wasn't an immediate descendant. But just to give you a little indication of Peter Horry, I've kind of been studying him for about the last 5 years, parallel to my working with trying to figure out who Francis Marion was. And Horry winds up being one of the more interesting characters of the American Revolution. About 4 or 5 years ago, I started just developing a little bit of paper about all the various conflicts in command that Francis Marion encountered during his 8-year tenure. Ironically, Peter Horry was probably a part of 75% of the conflicts in which Marion found himself involved. And I guess the other irony is that with all those conflicts, Horry and Marion became devoted to each other as far as their military careers go, because Horry stuck with them through thick and thin. And then also, near the time of Marion's death in 1794, the citizens of Georgetown sent Marion a letter applauding him for all his fine efforts during the Revolutionary War and afterwards. And of those 148 signers of this letter, Peter Horry was the first to sign it. And this is also significant because I won't go through all these trials and tribulations today, but they are so significant that one wonders why Peter Horry ever talked to Francis Marion again. It's totally amazing. So I'm going to give you just a brief flavor before I get into this one conflict, just an idea of maybe perhaps you can just get a feel for how odd this guy was and how he could get himself in this situation. Horry, just quick military background. He was right with Francis Marion when Francis Marion was elected as a captain basically a captain in the South Carolina forces. Marion was the third captain elected. Horry was the fifth captain. So they're very close, obviously very popular people. Horry followed Marion up the chain of command, ultimately becoming a lieutenant commandant of the 5th South Carolina Continental Regiment. And according to Horry, he became the command commandant of the 5th Continental Regiment in September of 1779. What's significant there is that in October 1779 we had the siege of Savannah, in which Horry would have been participating, being the commandant of the regiment. However, there's no record of him even being there. If you look at the primary, any of the sources, he's not even mentioned, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. But regardless of that, in January 1780, General Benjamin Lincoln decided it was time to consolidate the Continental regiments because of the losses incurred at Savannah. The result, going from 5 infantry regiments, they went down to 3 infantry regiments. Horry, being the least senior officer, wound up basically losing his command, and as a result, he then became what was known as a supernumerary officer. Basically, he was furloughed. He was laid off from his job, pending an increase in forces or different things or some other development. That other development happened at the beginning of February. Basically, 1 month later, all of a sudden, Horry gets a letter from Benjamin Lincoln, actually from Lincoln's aide, telling him to come back and take over as second in command of the 3rd Continental Regiment. This is the reformed regiment. So now we're talking about the dates are. I don't like to go to the dates too much, but they're kind of interesting in this case. This is February 11th. The letter's written. Horry must take 2 days to get the letter. He's up around Winyard Bay. So we're talking about a day and a half ride to get up there. While Horry has been on furlough, apparently he had time to think about other things. For after receiving this letter saying, come on back and join the 3rd Regiment, you can be second in command, not first in command. The commandant will give you a second job. Horry has found time to try to develop his love life, which I thought was kind of, in 1 month, he's already preparing himself to propose to a woman. And this woman is named Mary Mann. I don't know if you know too much about the Georgetown area, Winyard Bay area, but there's a little plantation over there that still exists called Mansfield Plantation, which is apparently it's a bed and breakfast right now. Well, Mary Mann was the woman who wound up basically developing Mansfield Plantation after her mother bought it, and then mother died, sister died. But as I said, her name was Mary Mann, not Mary Horry. There's a letter that I was able to find, and I had that Wright Tuberville and his wife picked up for me up at the New York Public Library. And I'll just give you the gist of it. It's really key. It's pretty much like one sentence. But what Horry writes to Mary Mann after he receives this order to get back to Charleston, and before he decides to head down there, which says, notwithstanding the return of my letter, I was determined to have offered myself in person to you. Nothing will satisfy me better than being approved by you, which will make me the happiest of men. Basically, if you read that one, it sounds like he's going to go back and he's going to propose to this woman. But then when you have to go back to the beginning of the letter, it says, notwithstanding the return of my letter, which would indicate to me that he must have written her an earlier letter, and she sent it back saying, no thank you. And think about that. Now, Peter Horry has just been turned down by Mary Mann, who's had a really nice plantation. It must have been just a real fox. So now he said, well, but he has something else he can do. He can go back to war, so he can salve all his wounds because he's going to become the second in command. We have a war going on down there. So he rides off to Charleston. About 20 miles down the road, a rider comes barreling up the road, stops him, and basically delivers a letter from Benjamin Lincoln's aide, which basically says, just kidding, we don't need you after all. Why don't you just go home? We'll call you again later, whenever we really need you. So apparently, Lieutenant Colonel William Henderson, who had been initially offered the job, turned it down, but then he changed his mind before Lincoln could get into the books that he had turned it down. So now we have Peter Horry being refused basically twice in, 2 days. So this just kind of sets the stage for the trials and tribulations of Peter Horry, which just continued throughout the war. We have 3 years worth of everything that could go wrong did go wrong for Peter Horry. But don't forget, this guy is he's Lieutenant Colonel in the Continental Army. He's no small fry. He's actually a very accomplished man, and at this point in time, he is only, we're talking 1780, he's only 33 years old. So he is really still a young man who had been the youngest colonel in the Continental Army, in the Southern Continental Army, which is pretty significant. But he's got all these other problems. So let's get to the real problem he gets to. Obviously, his personal life is in the dumps. His life as Continental officer looks like it's pretty much over. However, we still have, now we have Charleston has fallen. In one sense, that's good for Peter Horry, because now he can come back in and start getting in the war again. And of course, he winds up meeting up in North Carolina with Cab, running into Marion up there, and then the two of them kind of put their heads together, and then they start to organize. But we have our next antagonist comes into play. So we have Horry now is a second in command to Marion. We're now into we're into late August, late November 1780. I mean, this is along with Giles is out here. We have Giles, we have Urban, we have Horry. Come the beginning of 1781, all of a sudden we have Hezekiah and Neilan coming into the fray. Now, I don't know how many of you folks know who Hezekiah and Neilan is, but as you'll learn, Hezekiah, whereas Horry was seemingly quiet, planning, dedicated, analytical, diligent, Hezekiah and Neilan is like the alter ego to Peter Horry. He's the guy that won't stand for anything. If he doesn't like it, it's tough beans. It's full speed ahead. Damn the torpedoes. Horry and Neilan, who has a similar background, although he's coming from a similar military background, except just not quite as accomplished. Neilan is coming from more, I'll say, more of a middle class family. Neilan was an overseer on a plantation, whereas Horry grew up as one of the rich aristocrats of South Carolina. Neilan came up the hard way. He was in the South Carolina Regiment in 76, a little bit behind Horry. He had a light dragoon regiment in 79, so he's maybe a little bit farther behind Horry in advancement. But he resigned after Savannah. So once again, he avoided being captured when Charleston fell. But whenever the uprising occurred in late 1780, he came back into the fray. And by March of 1781, he is a major commandant of the 4th Light Horse in Marion's brigade. So at this point in time, March 1781, he's a major commandant of the 4th. I'm not quite sure what that really means. Horry is a lieutenant colonel commandant of the 4th. Basically, that's like a half step or a step below. And you probably may know Neilan as the one who suggested, engineered the Mahan Tower at Fort Watson, which was instrumental in bringing down the British at Fort Watson. That's probably the major claim to fame, except for the last one I'll tell you about right at the end if I have time, which is much more interesting. But ultimately, 1781, June, both Neilan and Horry are named to create cavalry regiments, state cavalry regiments, although the commissions are generated by a Continental officer, Nathaniel Greene, so it's still kind of unclear. Are these guys Continentals or are they state? I don't know if they ever really sorted it out. But June of 1781, Neilan and Horry are basically equals. Setting the stage, anytime you have two people equals who are actually total opposites, you know that things are not going to go well. Pretty good idea that's going to happen or not happen. So here's our structure, real quick. And we see that this is the structure of June 1781. Now, the reason why I'm showing this is I tried to explain this to my wife, and I just got her totally confused without having an org chart. So she suggested I get an org chart, so that's what I'm doing. June 1781. This is the chain of command between Neilan and Horry, so we did it together. Okay, we have Rutledge is the governor of South Carolina. These are state troops or militia. These are state troops, excuse me. So that means that as a direct report, this is the solid line, we have Horry with his cavalry regiment, and then we have Neilan with his cavalry regiment. Now, that's the direct line. Higher level, we have Sumter is the top brigadier general. Marion reports to Sumter on a direct basis. He may have, obviously, just on the side, Sumter would order Marion, of course, but Marion would ignore most of the orders. That's another thing. On a dotted line basis, we have Rutledge, who basically, he had a dotted line with Marion. He would give Marion orders. Of course, we have Greene over here, who would give orders to Sumter. Of course, Sumter wouldn't pay any attention to those orders either. And Greene would give Marion orders, and Marion would if they fit, then he'd go ahead and obey him. But if he didn't, he'd ignore him. But he never had any horses. And then we had a dotted line with Greene giving orders to Neilan and Horry. So basically, the thing was set up that Greene would give his orders to Neilan and to Horry because he gave them the commission. I think it was Greene's idea to create these regiments. So that's how this thing started in June 71. So it looks like it's relatively cool in the way it's set up. A few too many dotted lines in there, which is getting me a little bit upset. That's the way it works. Now, all of a sudden, a month later, we already have things starting to. Just the little seeds of doubt and all this. This Sumter orders Horry to take the command of Mayhem School. Now wait a minute, Sumter wasn't even in this thing before. Having a dotted line. You saw no dotted line. Sumter's dotted line didn't go down to Mayhem and Horry. So all of a sudden we already have something. They're already stepping out of this wonderful chain of command. Mayhem challenged Horry's right to command Mayhem's Corps. Basically, Sumter tells Horry to take a couple of Mayhem's Corps. I'm not sure what the purpose was going to be. Mayhem immediately says, wait a minute, you can't take my guys. And what Mayhem's smart enough to say, hey, let me see your commission. Because he knew that Mayhem knew that he and Horry had been commissioned at the same time. He was going to get proof of it. So he gets Horry's commission, he sees the dates are the same. So as far as Mayhem's concerned, we have the same date. Forget it, I don't have to listen to you. And probably for the first time in all of this relationship between Mayhem and Horry, this is Horry writing to Green. For the time being, Mayhem gave me up the command. And Mayhem thinks that we should settle this by drawing lots. Now personally, I think drawing lots is one of the best ways to make decisions. It's really simple. Black, white, or coin toss. Coin toss is probably the best. It's really black and white. Unfortunately, the problem there being is that Green, not thinking that there could possibly be any reason why Mayhem would consider it being a problem, he just writes back to Horry in a nice, legitimately, typical administrative way, bureaucratic way, that he cannot conceive how Colonel Mayhem's serious in his claim of rank, as he most undoubtedly knew he bore a commission superior to his. And then, just kind of la. I doubt not that Colonel Mayhem will readily yield to you the rank that you so justly claim. General Green, we're at the top of the food chain here. He doesn't realize that, number one, Mayhem does not accept Horry's Continental Commission. As far as Mayhem's concerned, they have equal commissions because they have a commission in this Continental / state / whatever regiment. And any previous commissions don't count. And that's why Mayhem says, I'm not going to listen to Horry. And of course, Horry being, once again, he has his bureaucratic sense too. He just writes back in a nice casual way. Your determination of rank between Colonel Mayhem and myself in my favor. I make no doubt Colonel Mayhem will be satisfied. So, case closed. Okay, well, this is the end of my talk. These things are all resolved. It's not really an issue. Oh, wait a minute. Now we get Henry Lee to get involved in this thing, because Mayhem and Henry Lee were like this because Henry Lee recommended Mayhem for this job. So Green's trying to get Henry Lee. Said, you go talk. Well, obviously Mayhem already knew what was right. He knew what was true. So he wasn't satisfied with Lee. Things kept going on and on with this. I won't go through the first part of this conference. It's not over. But this whole thing is building up to the Battle of Parker's Ferry in later August. The initial problem with Horry and Mayhem kind of dies down because Parker's Ferry happens and then Utah Springs happens, so there's no need for anybody to get into a finger pointing contest. But the one thing that does come out is that Green realizes that he can't manage these guys. And Green was pretty good about recognizing that he was incapable of managing lower subordinates. He was good at dealing with immediate subordinates. He was pretty good at dealing with them on a one-to-one basis, because most of them could understand logic, could understand what you were supposed to do, understood the chain of command. But he wasn't very good once you had to go down a couple levels in the chain of command. So he decides, forget it, I'm done with these guys. I'm going to give them to Marion. Marion, you take care of them. So what he does in October, he revises his reporting. He revises his dotted line chain of command, and they give it to Marion. So now we have Marion with a dotted line to Horry and Neilan. Basically, Marion is now responsible for Horry and Marion. I mean, Horry and Mayhem. Unfortunately, as you can probably imagine, that didn't fit very well either, because it didn't change, as far as Mayhem is concerned, that didn't change anything. You just got somebody else involved in this thing just to make things even more complicated. All right, so we have this going on with this delegation, and now we have the Jacksonville Assembly is getting ready to start up here. We had the elections, so Marion is now elected to the Senate, Mayham's elected to the House, and Horry is also. So in preparation for going to Jacksonville, and how this January 4th letter comes up, I'm not really quite sure. But Mayhem asked Green to make his regiment independent, reporting only to Green. Basically, what he wanted to do was that he didn't want. He just asked, I don't want to take anybody's orders but yours. Mayhem wants to go back to I don't know, June, July, because he doesn't want to report to America. But he tries to soften it a little bit by saying, I should never be against acting under General Marion when there's a real necessity for any of my superior officers. So he's basically trying to say that I don't mind reporting to these guys if it's really necessary. But the question is, who decides if it's really necessary or not? You can probably imagine that Mayhem's guys is going to have to decide whether it's really necessary for him to report to somebody else. I think Marion then kind of gets a flavor for what's going on here, so he says, hey, I need to meet with you and Horry. We need to settle this thing once and for all. So the best way to do that is to get the three of them in the same room, explain it to them, everybody look up and down, shake hands, everybody agree, we walk out of the room, the war goes on, everything's just hunky-dory. Well, surprisingly enough, with our friend Francis Marion, who also apparently has much of the, maybe has a little bit of Nathaniel Green in him as far as his diplomacy skills, a little bit too soft, perhaps too vague. I think a lot of it's just being too vague. Maybe they didn't have, well, Marion had no children, so he didn't know how to discipline his children by being firm and forceful and straightforward. So maybe this is not as possible. But things didn't go well. A week later, we have Horry alerts Green. Things aren't quite the way they want to be. During his meeting with Marion, Horry then writes to Green, your letter was produced, but the colonel would not accede to General Marion's opinion or your letter. So here we go. Here's Hezekiah Mann says that not only does he not have to report to General Marion, but he said, General Green, you're full of crap. I don't have to listen to you either. Which I thought was pretty bold. Pretty bold. But of course, Horry, being the good guy he is, says, I am ready to submit to justice, which, however, had been once before deprived of me, alluding probably to back earlier in 1780 when he didn't get that command that he rode down to Charleston to get. I cannot think my country will use me ill a second time. If it does, it will be my fault if I put myself in its power to be ill-used a third time. This guy is a prophet. He's a prophet. So Marion, of course, he's trying to keep the peace. He needs to make sure Green knows things. So he just reinforces everything. This is like going over and over and over. Basically, he says that Colonel Mann will not admit, as he looks, his former commission as void. His former commission was in the Continental. And what he's saying is he looks upon his in this case is Horry's former commission. Basically what Mann says is that Horry was made a supernumerary officer in Mayhem's mind. That means he resigned. The commission has been voided. But if you're made a supernumerary officer, you retain your commission, except you just don't have you're just laid off. Instead of being fired, you just got laid off. So you're still okay. But he said he promised to make his regiment independent of any command but yours. So once again, we saw that Mayhem had asked Green to make his command independent. Man, 10 days later, somehow, he believes that, Mayhem believes that Green has made it independent. And of course, Marion goes on just to say that the issues are pretty injurious, and that's to say the least. This thing gets kind of continues. I mean, you can see in Green, so now we're starting to get a little bit of frustration, more frustration coming in. Green is now a little frustrated. I cannot imagine on what principles Lieutenant Mayhem presumes to dispute the rank of Lieutenant Colonel Horry. The situation is like, just think about it. The guy's been told 2 or 3 times, and explained to him, for whatever reason, just doesn't believe it. Just won't accept it. But Green continues, and just baffled. Green fails to clarify the man. He talks in this letter, this January 17th letter, about wanting to make this Corps independent, blah, blah, blah. And he just tries to basically just explain why Mayhem's Corps is basically the same as Henry Lee's Corps. There's nothing about the fact that there's an issue with the regiments of Horry and Mayhem and the chain of command. Just kind of ignores it. Unfortunately, Horry doesn't know that. He thinks that Green's taking care of this thing in this letter. So, once again, we have Horry kind of going, everything's okay again. But now we're up to the middle of January. We have a legislature getting ready to convene. We're getting a little bit closer to the vestiture. And Marion has to leave because he has to go to the legislature because the legislators, I believe, tried to convene on the 8th or the 9th of January, but no, there wasn't a quorum. Marion is finally showing up he's trying to leave on the 18th. He realizes that without a quorum in a legislature, when you can't transact business, there is no government. So he's torn because he has a brigade that he's worried about. He's got commanders who just fight, just at each other's throats, but he has to leave. And he realizes that, and he also implies, and you can see that Green had confirmed Horry's superior rank with Mayhem. So, as far as Marion is concerned, as far as Horry's not concerned, it's all been settled because they think that Green's made it clear to Mayhem. So, now just all lottie-dottie, everything's happy again. We're all happy. It's resolved. Mayhem knows what's going on. So, Marion then just delegates his authority, turns his brigade over to Horry, and he also turns Mayhem's regiment over to Horry. Now don't forget, Mayhem was elected to the House, as was Horry, but neither Mayhem nor Horry went to the legislature. Marion was the only one because they stayed back because they had regiments to run in order. So now we have Horry formally over Mayhem's regiment, but Mayhem is still here. This can't be good. There's no way that this can be good. And you can see that Green realized, and Marion realized, that this may not work out for him. So he just make sure to remind Horry that the letter, this being a letter where he turns over authority. And if the enemy should approach your quarters, you find necessary, you must call on Colonel Mayhem's troops and horse. And then he makes it the end. And he wishes you may not be called on for no other purpose. And if you think back a few months, Mayhem was concerned that Marion was misusing his forces, which he may have been. So here he's just trying to make sure that he knows he's not supposed to use it wherever he wants to. But Horry doesn't look at it that way. Horry now has command. And I don't think he really means to do this. He's just trying to be a good commander who has now assumed control over new forces. So he has to find what's going on with these forces. So of course, Horry informs Mayhem, and his orders are to take command of your legion if I find it necessary. And if I find it necessary. Big difference. And then Horry requests a return of Mayhem's regiment in case of need. Return being he needs to know how many people he has in it, what the makeup of Mayhem's regiment is. Pretty basic stuff. He basically needs to have an inventory of what Mayhem's regiment is. And then he makes a really stupid mistake, where he puts in a wish for replacing 7 of Horry's men for 7 of Mayhem's. since names were closed. This is really stupid because he's already know he's going to incite man. But now he wants to exchange a couple of commands because it makes sense from a strictly logical standpoint. But of course, we don't have logic. We're not dealing with logical people. Okay, so now finally we're into the good stuff now. All right, so on the 20th, the next day, man writes back to Horry. I received your letters yesterday from Generals Green and Mary. Neither of you has wrote to me on the subject of giving you the rank. I therefore cannot think of giving up the rank to you. Forget it. I'm not going to do it. I don't have to. It's like kids, two little kids. Just fight. You may rely on it that I never shall submit. And to my part, I cannot see what right you have to expect to take the rank. I think it proper not to make you return my regiment, nor shall not obey any order that you may be pleased to send. This is the guy I want. He's going to be a trusted regimental supporter. I want this. Okay, so that's one thing. So he's a little hot. So he must have think about it a little bit. And he realizes maybe he stepped over the bounds just a little bit. This is not the court-martial or anything like that. I mean, this is just between two friends. So he decided, well, maybe I better write back and see if I can at least cover my butt a little bit. So he writes back, and basically he writes back just a less incendiary recap of the first letter. Basically saying the same thing, but just not such an accusatory fashion. Maybe such a one that he would get court-martialed. But then, man is man. He just can't resist. This guy is just can't resist and get him one final. So he writes in the note to bene, which in our language is the postscript or the PS. He writes, you mentioned in yours that you would not take any advantage of it. And he said, I would not advise you to attempt any such thing, for fear you may fail in the attempt. So, if you want to try it, you go right ahead. Buddy, you're in for it then. And then we don't need to worry about the British anymore. We just see these two regiments fighting it out. And these two boys, these two guys on that. And they have a big boxing ring. They're just going to, let's do this out right now. Which is the way they should have probably done. Except Horry would have got his butt whipped because he was not the best of shape. So, now we have that. We got all this fire going on. Marion updates Green. Another casual letter. You will see by the enclosed letter from Colonel Mann to Colonel Horry the obstinacy of the former in not giving up the rank until your positive order. Wait a minute. We had positive orders, didn't give up the rank anyhow. So, of course, Horry, he's pretty much, he's shot. So he writes back, he says that man interferes with his command such that he can scarcely act. Now, I think probably now man was probably just getting even maybe a little bit more out of hand, perhaps. I mean, I don't know, obviously, all things going on. But he starts giving passes without Horry's knowledge, Horry's knowledge. These passes were ones for ships coming from Charleston, or, going up the rivers to pick up or supply goods to the Patriots, being smuggled out, or the people that are coming out of Charleston, coming up to their plantations. A lot of that was going on now because we're now toward the end of the war. But the man was giving all these passes out, and these people are just abusing these passes. They're using them 2 or 3 times. And they're doing, actually, there was probably a lot of spying going on. Some of these passes were probably given to loyalists coming up to see what was going on and taking information. But Horry's the one that's responsible for all this. And he has no idea these passes are even being given out. He has no record of it. He only hears about it after the fact. Mayhem also threatened Horry's guard. Horry's guard was one location where he wanted them out, and they wouldn't leave. And he said, well, I'll force you. So now we have Mayhem's guys basically we're going to kick Horry's guys out. And there's another outpost where Mayhem himself, an outpost at Strawberry Ferry, where Mayhem decided that's where he wanted to have his camp. So he was basically told Horry's guys, get out of here, because Mayhem's whole regiment was going to come down to Strawberry Ferry. This is a lot. This guy had a lot. Now maybe Green finally. Here's our diplomatic Green finally. Don't get me wrong. I love Nathaniel Green. And I love Escott Mann. And I love Peter Horry. They're just characters in this wild plot going on. behind the scenes. It may have been the war's kind of toning down. They're getting bored. I don't know. I mean, need something new to get them excited. During lectures, man. I use the word lecture for a change. That just likes to, man. More than once or twice, I've given my opinion on the subject that Lieutenant Colonel Horry was entitled to superior rank, but still, I find the matter is contested. He even says more than once or twice. I mean, how many times does it take? Probably more like 4 or 5. And then now this is where the real lecture. This is where he finally puts his foot on man and stomps him. I beg leave to observe that rank is not what determines the character of an officer. It is actions. No officer ought to give up his rank where he is entitled to it, but to claim it upon any other will not add to his glory. In that case, here we have Nathaniel Green go to, this is like bringing Hezekiah man into your office and going, whack, 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 whack. And you can't, this is the good slap in the face that he should have given him 6 months ago. But who am I? He won the war. So. Of course, Miriam asked him back in, and he goes for his guy. Of course, he's surprised. What else is there? But he also writes positive orders basically not to interfere with his command unless he really has to. Because he knows we're still dealing with a lot of bare wires. But he also, here's a dig at General Green too. You got to dig Green once. But he wasn't hoped that General Green would have prevented such evils before them. So you can see Marion now he's starting to get his out too. He's pretty well taken. So now we think this thing's going to be close. This should be the end, right? Wait, then it's over. Now, that's at least this ongoing conflict between Marion and Horry is over. Because trust me, it ain't over yet. There's plenty that can happen. But Marion is so ticked off, he realizes what's going on here. So I think he's probably played his final card. So he decides, screw it. I'm going to head off to Jacksonboro. I'm elected to the House. I'm going to go serve my country in the House and let this thing just go on with it. I guess I'm not going to get my command. The man's out of the picture. You think? But Horry is not. So Horry thanks Green, but he implies now his personal